This is Alpena, Michigan, on Thunder Bay, Lake Huron. There's a myth associated with small towns that nothing ever happens there. Well, that's not exactly true, because there are humans in small towns, and where there are humans, there can be serious trouble.
I'm a detective with the police department here. I have a couple rules anytime I talk to someone, okay? You know the difference between the truth and a lie.
When you have someone who is 13 years old and is emotional, you begin with one question only. What do you want to tell me?
Oh, honestly, I was going to wait till I was like 20 to tell.
Besides the cops, and no, I have never told this story to anybody.
To have a 13-year-old child describe to you the depravity of man is savage. I spent my career closing murder cases, but I'm not the only one who answered the call. It takes a rare breed to solve the unsolvable, to catch a ruthless killer, to find justice for the dead. That's what it takes to be an American detective. Today is April the 6th of 2008 in Alpena, Michigan. And a fisherman is casting his rod, and he sees an object in the water, and it doesn't look right to him at all. He calls the police. And they discover, to their horror, it is a human torso. A male from the waist up, no hips, no legs. Badly decomposed, obviously been in the water a long time.
Dispatch, got to page Lieutenant Thompson to get him down here immediately.
My name is Larry Thompson. I was a police officer in Alpena, Michigan for 35 years. As a detective, I always felt that I was speaking for those victims who were no longer able to speak for themselves.
And our focus today is men who have had classic...
April 6, 2008 was a very defining day for me.
Thompson.
I was at home with my family. It was a weekend when the phone rang, and it was Central Dispatch. And the dispatcher said, a body's been located in the river. My mind started racing immediately. What do we have? When I first arrived, there was a significant presence. Police officers were there, firefighters were there. It became apparent very quickly that this was going to be a major investigation that I would be taking the lead on. This was unlike anything I'd ever seen.
And you have to think about where we are. Murders don't happen in this town. They've had one in the past 35 years. So Thompson is looking at this thing, thinking, could this be somebody who was drunk and fell off a boat and got cut in two by a propeller from a ship?
What do you think?
I think it's too soon to tell. Hold on a sec.
I immediately contacted the owners of the dam and asked that the dam be shut down. Officers were tasked with searching the shoreline.
Divers here.
They asked for a dive team to search for the remainder of this body. Where are the legs? Where are the feet? Where are the hips? They search thoroughly in the pool near the dam and the surrounding area, and they find nothing. So what we have is a torso only, and it's most likely all we're ever going to have.
I went to the morgue, met with the coroner, and viewed the body.
You don't see this every day.
Water does terrible things to human bodies, and the longer the body is in the water, the more damage occurs, to where it looks like something out of a horror film. There is no way to determine if there's any poisons or any alcohol or any drugs. There is no blood. The major organs have turned into a jelly.
What Dr. Varani was able to determine was the lower portion of the body had been severed from the upper portion by some sort of what he called mechanical means.
How did they come to be severed in two? A passing boat? The action of the dam itself that the body passed through? We don't know.
But he also found puncture wounds in the chest area.
So with the discovery of these wounds, this is no longer a wonderment of accidental death or drowning. This is a homicide.
I had a lot more questions than I had answers. We had no idea who the person was.
So you look for identifying marks or scars.
And on the right bicep of the victim was a tattoo that was still clearly visible.
It says Lori, Lori, a woman's name.
That obviously became crucial in the identification of the victim.
Any chance of getting prints on that?
Dr. Varani was very quick to say that the fingerprints were probably going to be of very limited value simply because the body was so deteriorated.
You stay in the water too long, the skin wrinkles. It's the same in a body that's been in water for a long time. The skin is wrinkled. So one of the techniques used by the coroner is to inject those fingertips with saline solution to get a rolled print off the finger.
Call me when you find something.
Sure.
Alpena, like any small town, is driven by the rumor mill. Didn't take long. Somebody's calling me up and say, hey, did you hear? They discovered this body floating in the Thunder Bay River. But where do they come from? And any number of things could be a possibility.
Thompson, 1 sec.
We had the media involved in not only what had been found,
We had divers. They didn't find anything.
but also what we were looking for. And as a result of that, we had tips coming in about missing persons.
What about the tattoos?
Thompson has the name Lori.
My fellow officers and I were checking computer programs, looking for possible missing persons with tattoos to rule them out.
Wait, what was that?
He finds one particular report of a middle-aged guy who is missing, and he has a tattoo. So Thompson gets a little excited.
Rose tattoo on right arm.
We need Lori, not roses.
I'm going to call the harbor, get a list of all the boat rentals for the past few months.
However, Thompson gets very lucky indeed
Yeah,
with the fingerprints.
you're kidding.
They identify this person, Jerry Holmes, and he's 47 years old.
The positive identification of the victim from the lab was the biggest piece of news that we had. And that really then put our investigation in high gear.
Who are you, Jerry Holmes? When were you last seen? Who were you with? Where are you supposed to be? Because you're certainly not there now. You're in the morgue, at least part of you. The police in Alpena, Michigan, find a torso that has been stabbed with something a long time ago.
Gerald Holmes.
We started looking into his background and people that he might have been associated with.
Wife's name, Lori Holmes. There's an address.
It's an ugly part of the job, but it has to be done.
Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Thompson, Alpena PD. I have some bad news to tell you, ma'am. We found your husband dead.
She became very emotional, crying.
It takes over an hour to settle her down, to where he's finally able to talk to her about his victim, Jerry Holmes.
Tell me a little about Jerry.
Lori proceeds to say that they've been married for 9 years, that Jerry had been married before, that he had had children with other women.
I'm Jerry's second oldest daughter. I was around like 9, 10 when my parents divorced. My dad, he was a big guy. Hunting, fishing, outdoors, he lived in it. He was just a nice guy. I remember the laughter when things were good.
He loved being a dad. He was willing to help anybody. He loved to tell stories. He was a people person.
The day that my mom told me that my dad's body was found, I was at work. Hands down, one of the worst days of my life.
Jerry's always known how to make me feel special, and he's a great father to the kids.
Lori says she has 4 children by another marriage, but Jerry is the father figure to those children.
So Jerry came into my life when I was 5 or 6. I remember being in their wedding. He was a very big father figure.
Lori explained that Jerry had had a somewhat difficult life. I learned that he, as a teenager, had been involved in a serious industrial accident.
He was working at a factory. They unbolted something on a furnace, and the furnace fell and pinned him. He suffered horrible injuries to his bottom half.
The doctors tried everything to save it and finally had to amputate the leg.
After it was amputated, I think he still fought the demons of the pain. It changed him.
That's when he first started turning to drugs, alcohol.
Take a person like Jerry Holmes, put him 17 years old, provide him with a grievous injury, then provide him with painkillers, and he develops a taste for alcohol. It's part of him. Jerry, in many ways, was doomed and crushed by the injury that occurred to him, changing his entire pathway of his life. It's really sad.
My dad went to AA, my mom went to Al-Anon. So as a family, we always worked towards my dad's sobriety. But the substance abuse led to their divorce.
After he divorced, he was having a lot of issues with addiction. He had gotten in a car accident. He was court ordered to a treatment facility in Alpena, Michigan, and that's where he met Lori.
I remember my mom and Jerry's relationship being very good in the beginning. We went to church all the time, and my mom really liked that about Jerry, that for once he was a good man.
There was a period in his life when he was clean and he was sober for several years, and he was very, very, very proud of it. But he wasn't able to overcome it, and he turned to drugs again.
I do remember a lot of times them arguing over substance abuse.
Jerry has problems with substance abuse as a result of physical injury. Lori and he became more distant. Their marriage was not going well.
I wanted to find out why there had not been a report of Jerry being missing. They got into frequent fights, and ultimately he had left the home. She had not seen him since late 2007.
And now someone has taken that life, and Thompson's mission is to find out who that is.
Was there somebody else?
There's this girl, Hannah.
Lori says the last time she saw Jerry, he was with a girl named Hannah Hoffman, who she describes as a friend of his, who also suffered some issues with drugs. She did not believe that Jerry was romantically involved with Hannah Hoffman.
How could I find Hannah?
I can tell you a few places maybe you could look for her.
Please.
So that gives Thompson a place to go. Thompson runs a check on Hannah Hoffman's name, and he finds something that's rather alarming. She has a criminal record.
Yes, she does.
How's it coming along with those bank accounts?
Bank accounts are coming along.
And further, it appears that she's a signature on Jerry Holmes's bank account.
Her name is on every one of these accounts.
Jerry wasn't able to work, but he received payments for workman's compensation. So he does have a source of income. So she has a criminal record and she has access to his money, be it a small amount of money, but the amount doesn't matter. Jerry spent 6 months in the water and somebody cut him in half, for God's sake. $1 million motives don't exist except in the movies. People will kill over 50 cents if they need it.
I think we made a lot of breakthroughs. I think we just pick this up next week.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Maybe she wanted all of it.
Ms. Hoffman?
Yeah.
And the way to get all of it is to get rid of Jerry.
Please sit down. How do you know Jerry?
We both got pretty bad into the painkillers and alcohol.
Hannah and Jerry Holmes often band together to try to help each other.
She said he slept on her couch for a short period of time. He did not want to go back to Lori's home. And she actually went to help him get a place for Jerry to stay.
This apartment, do you know how he paid for it?
Yeah, he paid with cash. I took him to the bank myself.
Is that when your name was placed in his account?
And Thompson also discovered that Jerry himself requested the bank to put Hannah on his account in case he was unable to make a withdrawal, that she could do so on his behalf. Hannah produces a receipt.
Thank you.
The last time she took money out of that account was 6 months prior, and it was for $52 to pay a bill that he owed because he was unable to go to the bank.
After speaking with Hannah, checking bank records, etc., we had pretty much ruled out any possible motive there.
Everything Hannah has to say makes her come across as a friend and a caretaker of Jerry Holmes and not a potential killer.
Do you know the address of this apartment?
Yeah, I can write it down for you.
Please.
Thompson now has an apartment to search. Now that's significant. What might be in there that might lead him to someone responsible for this death?
I contacted the owner of the apartment.
Landlords can be good witnesses because they pay attention to people. What kind of person are they renting to?
This is the apartment that Jerry Holmes rented from you.
Yeah, it's the apartment.
The landlord says Jerry Holmes actually never moved in. It's apparent that nobody ever lived there.
Have you tried Sunrise Mission yet?
He told me Jerry frequented the Sunrise Mission,
Sunrise Drive,
which basically provides a service allowing for individuals to stay temporarily, helps them look for work, etc.
The landlord suggested to Thompson Jerry was there a lot. Thompson responds to that shelter. He starts asking around.
Either of you know this man?
Everybody does know Jerry. Everybody liked Jerry.
You should talk to Ben.
A resident of the shelter says there's a guy named Ben Hayes.
Ben had been a resident for a period of time.
You should ask him about that ring he wears.
He has seen Ben Hayes wear a ring that belongs to Jerry Holmes. Well, now, you have some explaining to do, Mr. Hayes. You have a ring that belongs to a dead guy.
You happen to know how he got that ring?
I say Jerry's wife might know something about it.
It became apparent that there was some sort of a relationship between Ben and Lori during the time that she and Jerry were together. So that kind of piqued our interest.
We got a guy wearing his ring around and is tapping his wife.
Yeah, I need to put out an APB on Ben Hayes.
Well, that just might add up to murder. They run his record, and he is wanted on a warrant, which means there is a God. You don't have to play a game to get this guy to come in. Ben, when he realizes how much trouble he could be in, is the picture of cooperation.
How long have you known Lori and Jerry?
I don't know, man. A couple years, maybe.
He explains that he knows Jerry Holmes. He knows that Lori is his wife, but he also knows that Lori and Jerry are estranged.
Ultimately, Ben ended up with some of Jerry's property. He had a ring that Lori had given him.
He further says it is one of Jerry's old rings that he doesn't want anymore.
I felt kind of weird wearing it, you know.
And Ben said he gave it back to Lori.
What he told us was believable. He spoke very highly of Jerry. So there was nothing that would indicate that he would have any involvement in this suspicious death.
Thompson loses interest in him as a suspect.
This investigation was stalled. For the Alpena area, this was huge. We had people asking questions multiple times a day, wanting to know, where are you at? I can be honest with you, some days it seemed overwhelming. I wanted to know exactly what happened. But more importantly, his family needed to know.
I just remember it seemed like it was helter-skelter. And you want to know. I was fixated on the marks that was on Jerry's body. It just always came back to it didn't make sense.
Everyone is tortured in a murder case, beginning with the victim and then all the survivors. The families have to suffer through not knowing. In this case, they can't even have a proper funeral. They can't bury all of their loved one. It's just a terrible situation. And every day they ask you, what have you done today?
Lieutenant, I'm sorry to bother you.
Come on in.
It was not uncommon for Lori to call or even come in to see me asking questions. Hey, where are you at? What have you found? In the community, people were saying, is this ever going to be solved? And I think Lori was feeling that.
You'll be the first person we call when we do find something.
That's one of the hardest things for police officers is how do you accept the fact that it is the best you can do? There were sometimes very long days, heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching.
On the morning of August 24th, 2009, over a year since Jerry Holmes was pulled out of the water near the dam,
Thompson.
Lieutenant Thompson.
Thompson gets a phone call that's going to break this case wide open.
You're kidding me.
I received a phone call from dispatch.
I'm on my way.
And I was told that Sarah, Lori's daughter, wanted to talk to me. I had been waiting a long time for something to happen. I didn't know what it was going to be. But when I got this phone call, I thought in the back of my mind, is this it?
Where is she?
She's down here waiting for you in room 2.
Is her mom with her?
No.
Sarah at that time was 13 years old, a child. She had some troubles of her own, and as a result, Sarah was physically separated from her mother at that moment. And actually, she spoke with me with the consent of her foster mother at that time.
Sarah, my name's Larry Thompson. I'm a detective with the police department here. I know this is not easy for you.
It's hard.
I know, Sarah.
It's really hard living with it. I understand that.
Sarah had shared with me during that conversation, this was something that she had thought previously that she could take to her grave, but she had come to the realization that she had to tell someone.
Do you want me to say exactly how, and how do you want me to say?
Well, why don't you just start and you tell me the story, wherever you want to start.
But now she's willing to say, because she's probably always known.
I told the detective that I knew who killed Jerry.
Well, my.
Besides the cops and now I have never told this story to anybody. Honestly, I think I decided to do this interview because Jerry's story needs to be told. Jerry deserves justice, and my story needs to be told. I think we all deserve some closure, and I'm really hoping that that's what this gives me.
Sarah is a 13-year-old kid. Can what she say be relied upon? Well, let's find out what she has to say first. But it certainly sounds very promising.
I mean, I was only like turning 14 at the time. Well, honestly, I was gonna wait till I was like 20 to tell because I wanted my sisters to be able to understand.
At the time, I was in foster care, and I got really close to what was my foster mom. And it wasn't until one day I finally asked her if I told her something that she had to promise me she would never tell or I would kill myself. And she told me that she wouldn't. And all I had told her at the time was that I knew who killed Jerry.
When you have someone who is 13 years old and is emotional, you have to approach them as an understanding person. Let them do all the talking initially. Let them say what they're going to say. Then you can always question them later about what they did say. But let them say it first. Don't interrupt them. Don't stop them, because if you do, they may just stop. Let her tell you.
Me and my mom were really, really close at the time. And I was sleeping on the couch. And it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. My mom woke me up.
Sarah shared with me very openly. Lori had actually awakened her in the middle of the night.
Sarah, you gotta get up.
I had to stop her because I could barely understand her as I was just waking up.
She was crying, and she told me that Jerry was never going to be happy with nobody else but my mom.
And I really didn't know what she was talking about.
And she told me she wanted me to come with her, so I did.
She had asked me to come with her to the basement.
Took me to the basement. It stuck really, really, really bad. And she took me into the back room.
And that is when I seen that Jerry was laying on the floor. And I knew that he was dead.
Lori told her that she had stabbed Jerry.
So Thompson is recalling all the times Lori called him to see what's happening with the case. Lori wants to know, are they getting close to her? She wants to know if they've figured out that it's her. All part of the sociopathy that she feels.
It's not like, I don't know, like a dead animal smell, but worse. Like, you couldn't even stand in the room. It's the worst smell I've ever smelled in my life.
Smells trigger memories. Smells will never be forgotten when they are traumatic. You smell death for the first time, you'll always know what it is.
Training tells us that that's one of the things. If people talk about smells, that usually means that there's some level of truth to what they're telling you.
I was crying, and she talked to me, and she made me promise that I would never tell nobody.
My mom, she asked for help. She needed help. She didn't know how she was going to take care of it, how she was going to lift it. I didn't know what was going on. I was shaking. I just had no idea how to take all of it in.
There is such a thing as dead weight. Jerry Holmes is not a big man, but he's dead. She cannot pick him up and get him back up the stairs. Can't do it.
My mom said that she needed help to move the body to the truck so she could go put him somewhere. And I said, no, I couldn't touch him.
What kind of psychotic mind would ask for aid in moving a dead person from their 13-year-old daughter who believes that dead person is her father figure? How much of a sociopath do you have to be to disregard the feelings of others? I need something from you. I don't care about you. You have to help me. You're my daughter.
My mom did threaten me that if I told anybody that the same would happen to me.
you afraid of her?
Everybody was afraid of my mom.
Is Lori capable of that? Without question, she's capable of that. She would kill every kid in that house if it meant saving her own hide. That's what it means to be a sociopath.
So I got up the stairs.
Then she had the chainsaw to cut him in half. It was Jerry's chainsaw. It was a chainsaw my mom had bought for his 40th birthday.
Sarah hides under the covers upstairs, as any kid would do. Mommy Dearest has decided if she cuts this guy into 2 pieces, she can handle the pieces.
Dr. Varani had verified that the body had been cut in half with some sort of a mechanism. Would a saw be a mechanism? It certainly would.
My mom had went and bought a lot of chemicals. Bleach and pine saw were the main things I remember. And she was down there for hours, if not days, just cleaning, mopping every single room down there.
She told me that she dumped Jerry in the water.
I was having difficulty keeping my emotions in check during the conversation simply because of what I was hearing. For a 13-year-old telling me what happened, Sarah did a great job of explaining things. This conversation I was having with Sarah was very emotional for me. They had to go back later and review the videotape just to be sure I heard what I heard.
She had cut him in half and put the top half in the water because it would decay. And she had put the leg and his aesthetic leg into a dumpster. And she made me promise that I would never tell nobody, and that she would kill herself if anybody ever found out.
This girl is brave enough to come forward and tell someone that her mother was a monster and a killer.
I didn't talk to my mom for days because of that. Like, it was really hard to even look at my mom. Jerry was an amazing guy. We looked at him as a dad. He was always there for us. And it came to that day where they found someone in the water. And I knew it was Jerry because there was a half body floating. So I knew right then and there that it was Jerry.
It is a terrible thing to have a 13-year-old child describe to you the inhumanity of her own mother. Your heart goes out to that kid. She's been exposed suddenly to what a homicide detective gets exposed to every day, that the depravity of man or woman is limitless. Humans would embarrass a great white shark in how they kill. We like to believe we're very sophisticated these days, but we're only 15 minutes out of a tree. Push the right button and see what happens. When you're 13 years old, to have to see it is very, very difficult.
But obviously, we're talking about close to a year after the body had been found. The home where Lori had lived had changed hands. The basement had been cleaned out.
They look, they find nothing. Everyone is in consternation. Thompson decides, well, she didn't take this body and leave it here. She had to remove it from the house. Well, there's a truck that Lori drives. They have a warrant seeking physical evidence of murder. That includes the truck. They take it back to police laboratory.
And another of those aha moments. The seat of the truck had been cleaned quite extensively.
They find nothing in it until a sharp-eyed forensic investigator says, what's this?
Detectives.
There was blood on the seatbelt on the passenger side.
She almost cleaned the truck, but almost only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. one drop of blood. You say, well, isn't that remarkable? Yeah, it is remarkable. Is one drop of blood enough? Yeah, it is.
The seatbelt was actually fully extended when the blood got on it. So in other words, the only way that blood would have gotten there would have been if the seatbelt was extended and connected to the buckle around somebody.
Jerry doesn't drive because he has an artificial leg. Lori drives, and Jerry sits on the passenger side of the truck. What if they're together and Lori attacks him with something and stabs him to death with it in the truck? The difficulty is they don't have blood from Jerry Holmes. Water destroyed the blood. But what we do have is Jerry Holmes has children. Well, now.
They needed a source of my dad's DNA. We were willing to help however we could.
So Thompson submits it to the lab and waits for the phone to ring. That test is going to tell him if everything Sarah said was the truth and Lori is the killer in this case. We have a case that's gone on for a year. Now we're waiting for the one key piece of evidence, the blood found in Lori's truck, to determine whether or not Jerry died in that truck.
Thompson. I see.
Thompson gets the magic phone call. The cheek swab from the daughter shows that the drop of blood found in the pickup truck belongs to Jerry Holmes and to no one else on this planet. Game, set, and match.
Thank you very much for the call.
With this new scientific evidence, he felt that there was enough to charge Lori. She was arrested for murder.
I really want to share some things with you guys, but I was also advised not to say anything to you guys until I talk to my lawyer.
So she basically shut us down.
Everybody was preparing for a trial, and I was scared to face her.
I couldn't wait for the trial. I had so much rage in me. It was relieving and both just infuriating at the same time. We knew she was absolutely screwed when it came to being in front of a jury. I know some of the concerns were she might get charged with a lesser charge. I wanted to see everything thrown at her.
Any murder case, it takes 1 to 2 years and sometimes more to get into a courtroom. In the case of Lori, she decides it's probably in her interest to plead guilty, and she does. She pleads guilty to murder.
When Lori showed up in court, I drove 250 miles to be there because I felt that that was some closure for me.
Please approach the bench chair, Ms. Holmes.
I remember Lori in the courtroom. And she was built like a monster, is what I've always said. I can't even explain the feelings I had sitting there, like watching her demeanor. Stone-faced, like she didn't care. There was no remorse.
Lori's explanation was that
I went to find Jerry where he was staying.
Lori had gone to the apartment where Jerry was staying and had wanted him to come back home.
I promise you it's going to be so different now.
No,
Everything's
damn it,
gonna be
Lori.
different.
You got to quit this.
Jerry had been resistant to that.
Get in the car and come home. Please.
She says, please get in the truck. Let's talk about this. She finally convinces him to get in the truck. They drive away. They stop somewhere.
You can come home.
You're wasting your time, Lori.
She wanted to have a relationship with Jerry, but Jerry was done with her, and Lori didn't like that.
So what is the spark in this case? Well, you got to consider who the players are. Lori is psychotic. Lori is sociopathic. She's all those things.
Lori, if she doesn't get what she wants, she will do whatever she needs to get that.
There's no point. It never works out.
Jerry finally decides he's had enough. Lori's approach is no one leaves me. I'm in control of the planet. I put the world on automatic pilot when I go to sleep at night.
This isn't getting us anywhere. I gotta go.
Jerry!
Lori takes a screwdriver out from under the seat where she keeps it. And proceeds to stab Jerry in the abdomen multiple times. Thus, your shafted weapon. Reason goes out the window, and what is left is nothing but violence. A relatively helpless guy can be easily attacked by a woman, particularly by a banshee like Lori, who's absolutely out of control.
And out of her anger toward him, she ended up taking his life.
She takes him home. The panic sets in. We know the rest of it.
She basically admitted to stabbing him, but never admitted that she had dismembered the body, how she had disposed of the body or anything. So we, to this day, don't know exactly other than what she told Sarah. Lori ended up pleading guilty to second-degree murder, which in the state of Michigan has a typical punishment of life in prison.
I think that the work that the department did was great. Having to be faced with this day after day after day, it's like a brass ring that you're trying to grab, but it's just elusive. The levels of frustration probably ran very high at times. Then it's one tiny speck of blood that just turns everything around.
Did it weigh on me? Every day it weighed on me. But everybody worked intimately together to get the end result, which was bringing closure for the family and giving Jerry a voice since he no longer was with us.
When I came forward and I talked to Larry, I did feel, a weight off my shoulders. I felt like this might save me, but at the same time, I was scared to death. And I almost wondered if they were even going to believe something like this. But I think the most thing that made an impact is the fact that I held it for so long. And it helped that Larry made me feel comfortable. And he kept reminding me that I didn't do anything wrong because I felt like I did everything wrong by holding this in for so long.
It's a terrible, terrible thing for the survivors. Sarah loses her mother to a prison and her stepfather to a grave. These are things that people don't forget. These are things they suffer from all their lives. All the suffering, both sides of the family, go on and on. Terrible thing. Always a terrible thing.
I don't think that I'm ever going to forgive her for what she did. Because she destroyed me at such a young age. And it's not like I can just look at someone and talk to them like they've been through what I have. I actually posted a status not that long ago because I'm not just a story. I'm a human being and I have feelings. And I got through this. That's more than I could ever be thankful for because I never thought I was going to be able to get through it.
I hope that Sarah's able to break the chain of her family's tragedies.
What Sarah did at such a young age was probably the bravest thing I've ever heard or seen anybody do. Like, my heart breaks for everything she went through. And I'm just so thankful for her.
I think of him often and I miss him. I think he'd be proud of what his children have done. Jerry'd be very proud of all his kids.
This has just absolutely wrecked my family. My dad was just a nice person. Too nice, clearly. and just somebody that suffered from a lot of trauma himself. But no matter how bad my dad was doing, we always loved him. He was our dad. It's just really hard knowing that someone else took that all away from us.
Lori believes she destroyed the evidence. She did. A great deal of it, just not all of it. One drop of blood put her inside a steel box, which is where she belongs.
Point. The people of Little Compton were locking their doors for the first time in generations, the fear a palpable thing in the air. Lynch sat in the victim's house late that night. The forensics teams were gone, leaving only the yellow tape and the silence. He walked the halls, trying to see the world through the killer's eyes. He looked at the construction, the half-finished walls, the tarp covering the missing door. He stood by that tarp for a long time, watching it flutter in the night breeze. "You were here," Lynch whispered. "You didn't need to be a famous killer or a registered monster. You were just here." He turned back to the list of 30 workers. He realized he had been looking for a villain from a movie, when the real killer was likely someone who had simply been holding a hammer. Chapter 6, The Choir Boy. Among the 30 names on the construction list, two stood out because they had been the ones responsible for the very vulnerability Lynch was staring at: Kevin Moore and Jeremy Motika. They were the carpenters who had cut the hole in the wall. They were the ones who knew exactly how easy it was to slip inside Angela's sanctuary. Lynch assigned a detective to find Motika. He lived in Fall River, Massachusetts, a gritty industrial city just across the state line. When the detective returned with a description, Lynch felt a strange unease. "He looks like a choir boy, lieutenant. Blonde hair, blue eyes, 21 years old. Looks like he couldn't hurt a fly." Lynch had heard that before. Ted Bundy had been charming. John Wayne Gacy had been a pillar of the community. Appearance was the ultimate mask for the sociopath. They brought Motika in for a chat. He was the picture of youthful innocence, wearing a clean work shirt and a polite smile. He spoke about his night on the 29th with a level of detail that felt rehearsed. "I was drinking with the kids next door," Motika said, his blue eyes wide and earnest. "Rum and beer. We were at it all night. I passed out by midnight and didn't wake up until 8 the next morning." You can ask them. They did ask them. The neighbors confirmed they were drinking. But as Lynch dug deeper, the choir boy began to show cracks. "He's got a record," Steve, Wardell said, dropping a file on the desk. "Kidnapping and assault in Massachusetts. He snatched a woman off the street a few years back." Lynch felt the snap of a puzzle piece falling into place. The angelic boy had a history of preying on women. Then came the call that changed everything. It was Kevin Moore, the other carpenter. "Lieutenant, you need to know something," Moore said, his voice trembling over the line. "Jeremy, he's acting insane. He's asking me about shoe prints. He's obsessed with what the police found. And yesterday, I heard him on the phone with his girlfriend. He was screaming at her, to take his work boots, the ones he wore to the Shaw house, and hide them at her parents' place on Cape Cod. Why would he do that if he was innocent? Kevin, Lynch asked, already reaching for his jacket. He wouldn't, Moore replied. He's scared, Lieutenant. He's scared because he knows what he did. Chapter 7, The Absurdity of Evil. The final confrontation took place in a sterile interrogation room that smelled of floor wax and desperation. Jeremy Motika sat across from Lynch, his blonde hair caught in the harsh overhead lights. He was still trying to maintain the facade of the innocent contractor, but the sweat on his brow told a different story. We have your DNA, Jeremy, Lynch said, his voice a low, steady rumble. We matched it to the evidence found in Angela Shaw. There's no point in lying anymore. Motika leaned forward, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit that didn't exist. And then he uttered the most absurd, insulting lie Lynch had ever heard in 23 years of police work. Okay, look, Motika whispered. I went there that night, but only to use her tub. I didn't have hot water at my place, and I knew she had a nice bath. I went in through the tarp. I took a bath, and I did my business in the water. I didn't see her. She must have taken a bath after I left and absorbed. You know, the DNA. The room went dead silent. Lynch stared at him, a mixture of disgust and cold fury rising in his chest. To suggest that a grandmother would absorb a killer's DNA from bathwater was more than a lie. It was a final, pathetic act of cowardice. Jeremy, Lynch said, his voice like grinding stones. You beat that woman until her internal organs ruptured. You raped her in her own bed. You jumped on her chest until her ribs crushed her lungs. And then you dragged her into that tub and threw a hairdryer in to cover your tracks. You're not a contractor. You're not a choir boy. You're an animal. Motika's eyes went cold. The mask didn't just crack. It fell away, revealing the hollow, dark void beneath. He didn't confess. He didn't cry. He simply sat there, a predator finally caged. The trial was a mere formality. The DNA evidence was an absolute match. The testimony of his co-worker and his girlfriend provided the narrative of his guilt. The jury didn't take long. Guilty. First-degree murder. First-degree sexual assault. Life without the possibility of parole. Epilogue. The shadows and the sun. The day the sentence was handed down, the sun was shining over Little Compton, just as it had on the day of the ball game. Lieutenant Stephen Lynch stood on the courthouse steps, watching Angela's sons walk toward their cars. They had their answers, but the light in their eyes had been permanently dimmed. Justice had been served, but it hadn't brought Angela back. It hadn't unstripped the bed or unfilled the tub. Lynch thought about the nature of evil. It wasn't always a monster under the bed or a stranger in a dark alley. Sometimes it was the boy who fixed your stairs. It was the average guy who drank beer with his neighbors and then drove 20 minutes to destroy a life just because he knew he could. He drove back to his own home, the weight of the case finally beginning to lift. He saw his son in the yard, practicing his swing. He walked over and pulled the boy into a hug, a gesture so sudden and fierce that the 12-year-old looked up in surprise. "You okay?" "Dad, I'm fine, son," Lynch said, looking out toward the horizon where the Atlantic met the sky. "I'm just glad to be home." In Little Compton, the gardens would bloom again. The garden shop would find a new expert on perennials. But the town would never truly be the same. The doors would remain locked. The shadows under the trees would always seem a little longer, and the name Jeremy Motika would be whispered as a reminder that even in the most beautiful places, the darkness is only ever a tarp thickness away. The quarterback had won the game, but as Lynch knew all too well, the season of shadows never truly ends. Salt, soil, and sin, the Little Compton Massacre. Prologue, the fragrance of May. May 1999. Little Compton, Rhode Island, was a sanctuary of stone walls and salt-crusted air. It was the kind of town where the Atlantic breeze carried the scent of expensive mulch and the quiet hum of privilege. People came here for the silence of silence so thick it felt like a physical presence, protected by centuries of tradition and a rugged coastline that discouraged uninvited guests. In this corner of the world, crime was a foreign concept, usually reserved for news broadcasts from Providence or Boston. Here, the biggest scandal was a property line dispute or a neighbor's dog unearthing a prize-winning hydrangea. Angela Spence Shaw thrived in that silence. At 66, she was a woman of quiet, understated strength. An immigrant from Great Britain, she carried the poise of her heritage like a tailored coat, elegant, resilient, and slightly weathered by the storms of life. She was a widow who had turned her grief into a garden, finding solace in the rhythmic labor of planting and pruning. At the local garden shop, she was the heartbeat of the greenhouse, a woman who understood the language of perennials and the delicate needs of blossoming shrubs. But on that Tuesday morning, the heartbeat stopped. Martha, her longtime co-worker, arrived at the shop as the dew was still clinging to the petals of the morning glory. The sun was climbing, and the humidity was already beginning to stir. Angela was always the first to arrive, her silver hair catching the light as she moved among the rows of green. "Angela," Martha called out, her voice lost in the rustle of leaves. By 10 o'clock a.m., the absence had transformed from a curiosity into a cold weight in Martha's chest. Angela wasn't just late. She was missing, driven by an intuition she couldn't name. Martha drove down the winding coastal roads toward Angela's home. The house was a work in progress, a historic structure under renovation, surrounded by ancient oaks that whispered in the wind. When Martha pulled into the driveway, the house looked serene, almost mocking in its stillness. But the front door was unlocked. Martha stepped inside, and the silence changed. It was no longer the peaceful quiet of a coastal morning. It was the hollow, terrifying silence of a void. "Angela, are you up there?" Martha climbed the stairs, her breath coming in shallow hitches. She reached the bathroom door. She knocked once, then pushed. The scent hit her first, not the salt spray of the sea or the damp earth of the garden, but something metallic, heavy, and visceral. Angela was in the bathtub. The water was a dark, murky crimson, a stark contrast to the white porcelain. Submerged in that bloody soup was a scene of calculated, animalistic brutality. A hairdryer lay at the bottom of the tub, its cord snaking toward the outlet like a dead thing. The silence of Little Compton had been shattered, and for Martha, the world would never be quiet again. Chapter 1: The Quarterback. Lieutenant Stephen Lynch of the Rhode Island State Police was a man who lived in the margins of other people's nightmares. After 23 years in law enforcement, his eyes had a way of cataloging a room before his brain even processed the details. He was a professional boots polished to a mirror shine, a moral compass that never wavered, and a soul that had learned to compartmentalize the darkness he witnessed every day. It was Memorial Day weekend, the unofficial start of summer. Lynch was at his 12-year-old son's Little League game, standing in the bleachers with a cardboard cup of lukewarm coffee. For a few brief moments, he wasn't the head of the major crimes unit. He was just a dad watching his boy round second base. Then, the pager on his belt erupted into a frantic, staccato vibration. He stepped away from the cheering parents, the transition from father to investigator happening in a heartbeat. "Lynch," he said, his voice flat. "Lieutenant, we've got a situation in Little Compton." The dispatcher's voice was strained. "A 66-year-old female found in a bathtub. The locals think it's an accident electrocution, but something's wrong. It's messy, Steve. Very messy." Lynch looked back at the field. His son was sliding into third, safe in a cloud of dust. He caught his wife's eye from across the stands. She saw the set of his jaw and the way he reached for his keys. She gave a small, sad nod. The work never waited for the bottom of the ninth. By the time Lynch arrived at the scene, the sun was casting long, jagged shadows across the salt marshes. He was met by Sid Wardell, a new detective with the Little Compton PD. Wardell looked pale, his hands shoved deep into his pockets to hide the tremor. Little Compton hadn't seen a murder in decades. For the local officers, this wasn't a case file, it was an assault on their identity. "Lieutenant," Wardell said, his voice cracking, I don't know where to start. It looks like she fell, but the bedroom is just God." Lynch didn't say a word. He entered the house, his internal clock beginning its rhythmic tick. He walked through the ground floor first, noting the lack of forced entry, the expensive furniture left untouched, the purse on the counter containing $500 in cash. This wasn't a robbery. He climbed the stairs. In the master bedroom, the story began to unfold in the language of spatters and shadows. The bed was stripped bare. No sheets, no pillows, just the cold expanse of the mattress. On the walls, tiny droplets of blood high velocity impact told the tale of a struggle that had ended long before the bathtub. Someone was thorough, Lynch muttered, squatting to examine the carpet. The bedroom is where the violence happened. The bathroom is where the play began. He entered the bathroom. The smell of copper was overwhelming. The medical examiner's team was already working, but Lynch saw through the chaos. He saw the hairdryer, the way it was positioned, the way the body had been staged to suggest a domestic accident. The killer wanted us to believe she was a clumsy grandmother, Lynch said to Wardell, who was hovering in the doorway. But look at her chest. Look at the bruising. You don't get that from a fall. Someone jumped on her. Someone used their full weight to crush the life out of her. This wasn't an accident. This was an execution by an animal. Lynch walked to the hallway, his eyes settling on a large section of the exterior wall that had been removed for renovation. It was covered only by a thin, flapping sheet of blue plastic tarp. The hole in the armor, Lynch whispered. A professional would use the door. A monster uses the hole. Chapter 2. An unlikely shadow. As the sun rose on the first day of the investigation, Lynch set up a mobile command center at the local police station. He pulled in the heavy hitters, the Violent Fugitive Task Force, and the major crimes experts. They began by building a profile of Angela Spenshaw. She was a woman without enemies, a beloved member of the community who had spent her life cultivating beauty. If she didn't have enemies, Lynch told his team, then she had a predator, someone who watched her, someone who knew the rhythm of this house. The first name to bubble up from the local records was Patrick Zimmerman. Zimmerman was a registered sex offender living within a 3-mile radius. In a town like Little Compton, he was a neon sign in a dark alley. He had a history of violent sexual assault, the kind of record that made a detective's blood boil. Lynch brought him in. Zimmerman sat in the interrogation room, the fluorescent lights reflecting off his sweating forehead. He was cooperative, almost pathologically so. I heard about what happened, Zimmerman said, his voice a gravelly whisper. I'm a different man now, Lieutenant. I got a job. I got a life. I didn't touch that lady. Lynch leaned in, his face inches from Zimmerman's. Then you won't mind giving us a blood sample, Patrick, to clear your name. Take whatever you want, Zimmerman replied too quickly. I just want to go home. Lynch watched him leave, the skepticism thick in the air. But 2 days later, the lab results came back. Zimmerman was a ghost. His DNA didn't match the semen recovered from the victim's body. One down, Lynch muttered, crossing the name off the board. But the ghost of 1965 is still looming. The ghost was Stanley Jindro. In 1965, Jindro had committed the only other murder in Little Compton's modern history. He had killed a young babysitter, crushing her skull with a rock because she refused to go for a ride in his car. Now, decades later, he was out on parole, and his family lived directly across the street from Angela. The coincidence was too grotesque to ignore. Lynch tracked Gendro down. He was an old man now, his eyes clouded with a weary sort of resignation. "I did my time," Gendro said, his voice trembling as he sat on his porch. "I know what people think of me, but I haven't hurt a soul since I got out." Lynch pressed him hard, looking for the spark of the killer who had once used a rock to solve his problems. He demanded a blood sample. Gendro gave it without a fight, a man who had long since grown tired of being a suspect. Again, no match. The investigation was stalling. The usual suspects were clean. The town was beginning to panic, the coastal fog feeling more like a shroud with each passing day. Lynch stood on Angela's porch, watching the blue tarp flap in the wind like a wounded wing. "We're looking for the past," Lynch told Wardo. "We need to look at the people who were here last week, the hands that built these walls." Chapter 3, The Carpenter's Tools. Lynch shifted his focus to the renovation crew. 30 men had been working on the house over the past few months. 30 men who knew the layout, the schedules, and the glaring vulnerability of the blue tarp. Most were locals, men with families and clean records. But Lynch didn't care about reputations. He cared about access. He began a systematic sweep of the crew, interviewing them one by one. Then came Kevin Moore and Jeremy Motika. Jeremy Motika was 22 years old, with blonde hair, blue eyes, and a smile that seemed to radiate innocence. When he sat down with Detective Teller, he didn't look like a man who had been questioned in a murder investigation. He looked like a college kid waiting for a summer job. "Yeah, I worked at the Shaw place," Jeremy said, leaning back comfortably. "Nice lady. Real tragedy. I was devastated when I heard." "Where were you that Friday night, Jeremy?" Teller asked, his tone casual. "I was at work until mid-afternoon. Then I went home to Fall River, had some drinks with the neighbors, just some beer and rum. You know how it is. We stayed up late. Then I crashed. The next morning, I drove out to see my girlfriend on Cape Cod. I was pretty hungover, so I just slept most of the day. It was a perfect alibi. It was human, relatable, and backed by a timeline that seemed airtight." But Lynch, reading the transcript later, felt a cold knot in his stomach. "He's too specific," Lynch said. "He remembers the exact drinks, the exact time he left. Most 22-year-olds who spend a night drinking rum can't tell you what time they brushed their teeth, let alone when they went to bed." The investigation began to peel back the layers of the angelic carpenter. A background check revealed a dark stain, a prior arrest for kidnapping and assaulting a woman in Massachusetts. It wasn't a murder, but it was a blueprint. Lynch moved his team to Fall River, watching Motika's every move. He reached out to Kevin Moore, Motika's co-worker and friend. He's been acting weird. Lieutenant Moore confessed over a beer in a quiet bar, obsessed with the news, always asking what the cops know. And then there's the boots. The boots! He told his girlfriend to move his work boots to the Cape. Said he didn't want the police confusing them with someone else's. And the other day, on the site, I told him not to worry because he was never upstairs in the Shaw house. Jeremy got all agitated. He said, I had to use the bathroom sometime, didn't I? Lynch leaned back, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. Motika had placed himself in the room. He had hidden the boots. He was scared. Chapter 4, The Science of Silence. Lynch knew he didn't have enough for a search warrant. He needed Motika to hand him the keys to his own cage. He invited Jeremy back to the station, not as a suspect, but as a helpful witness. Jeremy, we're close, Lynch said, sitting across from the young man. We've got DNA from the scene. We're just asking all the workers to provide a sample so we can rule everyone out. It's just a formality. Motika smiled that easy, blonde-haired smile. Sure, Lieutenant, I want to help. I have nothing to hide. He gave the blood. He walked out of the station with his head held high, convinced he had outsmarted the veteran detective. He didn't understand that the DNA he had left inside Angela Spenshall was a permanent, immutable record of his sin. 10 days later, the lab results arrived. Lynch sat in his office, the silence of the room heavy with anticipation. He opened the envelope. Match. 100%. Get the handcuffs, Lynch said. The arrest was a whirlwind. When they brought Motika in, the charm was gone, replaced by a frantic, cornered desperation. He tried one last lie so absurd it almost made Lynch laugh. Okay. Look, Motika stammered, his eyes darting around the room. I didn't kill her. We had a thing. We had consensual sex that night. I went through the tarp. We talked, and it just happened. Then I left. She must have had an accident after I was gone. Lynch stood up, his presence filling the small room. Jeremy, she was 66 years old. You were a stranger working on her house. You beat her until her liver ruptured. You raped her, and then you tried to electrocute her body to hide the evidence. There was no thing. There was only a monster and a victim. Chapter 5. The Weight of Justice. The trial of Jeremy Motika was a masterclass in forensic evidence. The prosecution laid out the timeline with clinical precision: the drinking in Fall River, the 20-minute drive to Little Compton, the entry through the blue tarp. The medical examiner's testimony was the hardest to hear. He described the animalistic nature of the blunt force trauma, the sheer force required to cause such internal damage. He spoke of the hairdryer, a pathetic attempt at staging that only served to highlight the killer's cold-blooded intent. Angela's son sat in the front row, their faces masks of controlled agony. They watched as the young man who had once worked on their mother's home sat impassively, his blond hair neatly combed, his blue eyes staring at nothing. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on all counts. First-degree murder. First-degree sexual assault. The judge's sentencing was a final, echoing blow. Jeremy Motika, you are a predator who lacks the basic human capacity for empathy. You didn't just take a life. You attempted to erase the dignity of a woman who had given nothing but kindness to this world. You will spend the rest of your life in a cell, where the only silence you hear will be the sound of your own conscience, if you even have one. As Motika was led away, Lynch stood in the back of the courtroom. He felt a familiar sense of relief, tempered by the knowledge that the world was still a place where tarps could be lifted and monsters could walk through. He drove back to Little Compton one last time. The house was finished now, the blue tarp replaced by solid cedar siding. The garden was thriving, the perennials Angela had planted years ago blooming in a riot of color. Lynch stood by the stone wall, the salt air filling his lungs. He thought of his son, of the Little League games yet to come, and of the fragile silence of a small town. He had done his job. He had been the quarterback. And for now, the game was over. End of novel. The tarp over silence. A novelization of the Little Compton tragedy. Prologue, The Garden Shadow. Little Compton was not a place where one expected to find death. It was a town of salt air, ancient stone walls, and the kind of quiet that felt like a thick, comforting blanket. Nestled near the opulence of Newport, Rhode Island, it was the humble, elegant sibling of place of beach roses and sprawling gardens. Angela Spenshaw loved the silence. At 66, she had found a rhythm in it. An immigrant from Great Britain, she carried the poise of the old world into the soil of the new. She spent her days at the local garden shop, her hands perpetually stained with the honest grime of peat moss and potting soil. To the townspeople, she was a fixture of peace, a widow who had survived the loss of 2 husbands and found solace in the blooming of a perennial. On that Saturday in 1999, the sun rose over the Atlantic, painting the coastal houses in hues of gold and amber. But at Angela's house, the silence was different. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a held breath. Inside, the air was heavy. A draft moved through a gap in the wall where a renovation was underway, a vulnerability hidden behind a flapping blue plastic tarp. Angela didn't show up for work that morning. And in a town like Little Compton, where the clocks were set by the routines of its neighbors, a missing person wasn't just a curiosity. It was an alarm. Chapter 1, The Bath. The door was unlocked. When Angela's coworker, a woman used to the cheerful morning greetings of the garden shop, stepped onto the porch, she felt a prickle of unease. Angela, she called out. Her voice seemed to vanish into the hallway. The house was neat. The light filtered through the windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Everything looked fine. That was the horror of it. There was no sign of a struggle in the entryway. No shattered glass. Just the oppressive, clinical stillness of an empty home. Angela, are you up there? The co-worker climbed the stairs, her footsteps echoing against the wood. She reached the bathroom door. It was closed, but not latched. A sliver of darkness peeked through the frame. She pushed it open. The smell hit her first dampness mixed with something metallic. Something wrong. The bathtub was full. Angela was there, submerged in the cold water. But the woman in the tub was barely recognizable as the vibrant gardener who knew the Latin name of every flower in the county. Beside her, tangled in the water, lay a handheld hairdryer. The scream that followed tore through the quiet of Little Compton, ending the town's decades-long streak of innocence. Chapter 2. The Lieutenant's Game. Lieutenant Stephen Lynch lived for the weekends, though he rarely got to keep them. In May 1999, he was a veteran of 23 years with the Rhode Island State Police. He was the man they called when the puzzles were missing pieces, the quarterback of the major crimes unit. But today, he was just a father. He stood in the grass of a little league field, the sun hot on his neck, watching his 12-year-old son take his stance at home plate. The crack of the bat was the only thing on his mind. Come on, kid, keep your eye on it, Lynch shouted, a rare smile breaking across his weathered face. Then the pager on his belt began to vibrate a frantic, rhythmic buzzing that felt like a cold needle against his skin. He didn't have to look at it to know the weekend was over. He looked at his son, then at the pager. Little Compton, unattended death. Suspicious. Lynch pulled his cell phone from his pocket, walking away from the cheers of the crowd. Lynch, he barked into the receiver. Lieutenant, we've got a bad one down in Little Compton. The voice on the other end was strained. A woman in a tub. Local PD is out of their depth. They haven't had a homicide since the 60s. Lynch sighed, watching his son slide into second base. The boy looked up, searching for his father's approval. But Lynch was already turning toward his car. I'm on my way, he said. He caught his son's eye and gave a small, apologetic wave. The boy knew that wave. It was the duty call's wave. It was the price of being the man who caught the monsters. Chapter 3. The Canvas of Violence. By the time Lynch arrived at the scene, the quaint beach town was swarming with cruisers. He met Sid Wardell, a new detective with the Little Compton PD. Wardell looked pale, his eyes reflecting a shock that hadn't yet settled into the professional cynicism required for the job. Lieutenant, Wardell said, greeting him on the lawn. Sorry to ruin the holiday. Save it, Sid. What are we looking at? Angela Spenshaw, 66, found by a coworker. It looks like an accident at first glance. Hairdryer in the tub, but the bedroom. Wardell trailed off, gesturing toward the house. Lynch stepped inside. He was a man of logic and procedure, but he always felt the temperature of a crime scene. This house felt cold. They walked into the master bedroom. Lynch stopped. "Check this out." Wardell pointed to the bed. The bed linens were gone. The mattress was bare, stripped with a clinical precision that suggested the killer had time. But the walls told a different story. Blood spatter decorated the surfaces, not the neat, accidental spray of a fall, but the violent, high-velocity evidence of a struggle. "The action happens here," Lynch whispered, his eyes scanning the room like a camera. "But the result is in the bathroom." He moved her. He looked at the floor. In the corner, he saw the wallet. $500 in cash was tucked inside, untouched. Jewelry sat on the dresser. It wasn't a robbery, Lynch noted. This wasn't about money. He walked to the bathroom. The body had been removed by the medical examiner, but the image remained in the photos. The hairdryer, the water. "The hairdryer is a stage prop," Lynch said. "He wanted us to think she slipped, fell, and got electrocuted. But you don't strip the bed for an accident. You don't leave blood on the walls for an accident." He looked at the victim's file. The injuries were horrific. Blunt force trauma that had shattered her facial structure. Ruptured organs. It wasn't just a murder, it was an annihilation. "Someone became an animal in this room," Lynch said, "and then they tried to play scientist in the bathroom." Chapter 4, The Usual Shadows. The investigation began with the obvious. In a town of 9,000 people, where everyone knew everyone, a stranger was a beacon. "Who's our local trouble?" Lynch asked during the first briefing at the small police station. Wardell flipped through a folder. "We have one. Patrick Zimmerman. He's a registered sex offender. Violent history. He lives close enough to have watched the house." "Pick him up," Lynch ordered. Lynch watched from behind the glass as they interviewed Zimmerman. The man was the picture of cooperation to cooperative. He offered his blood for DNA before they even asked. He accounted for his time with the nervous energy of a man who knew his past would always be his shadow. "He's giving us everything," Wardell whispered. "Because he knows he didn't do it," Lynch replied. Days later, the results confirmed it. Zimmerman's DNA was not a match. The lead went cold. "What about the ghost?" Wardell asked one afternoon, leaning against the map of the town. "The ghost, Stanley Gendro. He committed the only other murder this town has seen, back in 1965. He killed a babysitter with a rock. His family lives right across the street from the Shaw House." Lynch sharpened his focus. "A killer in the neighborhood? Why am I just hearing this now? He's been out for years. Low profile. But he was in town a few days ago. The hunt for Gendro took them across state lines into the gritty streets of the neighboring cities. When they finally found him, the old killer looked tired. He sat in the interrogation room, clutching a romance novel, his eyes devoid of the fire that must have driven him 30 years prior. "I learned my lesson. Lieutenant," Gendro said, his voice a gravelly whisper. I don't hurt people anymore. Again, the DNA proved him right. Another dead end. Lynch felt the pressure mounting. The town was terrified. Grandmothers were locking doors that hadn't seen a key in decades. The American detective was supposed to have answers, but all he had was a strip bed and a blue tarp. Chapter 5. The Invisible Entryway. Lynch went back to the house. He spent hours standing in the bedroom, staring at the walls until the blood patterns began to speak. How did he get in? He walked the perimeter. The windows were locked. The front door had been secure. Then he saw it. The renovation. A section of the wall had been removed to create a new entryway. During the day, the construction crew worked there. At night, it was covered only by a heavy blue tarp. It wasn't a wall. It was a curtain. The vulnerability, Lynch muttered. He didn't have to break in. He just had to walk through the plastic. He called the construction company. I need a list. Every name, every contractor, every laborer, every person who swung a hammer on that property in the last month. The list came back with 30 names. Among them were 2 men who had spent the most time on that specific wall, Kevin Moore and Jeremy Motika. Moore checked out. He was a family man, stable, with a rock-solid alibi. Then there was Jeremy. Jeremy Motika was 21. He had blonde hair and blue eyes that some described as angelic. He looked like the boy next door, the kind of kid you'd trust to fix your porch or paint your fence. When Detective Teller went to Fall River to interview him, Jeremy was calm. He was drinking rum and beer with some teenagers next door when the police arrived. I was at work until 3:30, Jeremy told them, leaning against his truck. Then I went home, started drinking, went to bed. Next day, I drove to the Cape to see my girlfriend. He was specific. He was relaxed. He even mentioned ordering a pizza. But as Lynch reviewed the notes, the inconsistencies began to itch at the back of his brain. Jeremy said he was in bed by midnight. His girlfriend said he arrived at the Cape at 9:00 a.m. looking like death pale, hungover, and vibrating with an energy she couldn't describe. And then the phone rang. It was Kevin Moore, the co-worker. Lieutenant, Moore said, his voice low, I think you need to look at Jeremy again. He's acting. Wrong. Define wrong, Kevin. He's obsessed with the shoes. He saw a box in your cruiser that said shoe impressions. He went home and told his girlfriend to take his work boots to the Cape, to get them as far away from Little Compton as possible. Lynch felt the cold rush of the hunt. And there's one more thing, more added. I told him he had nothing to worry about because he was never upstairs in that house. Jeremy got real quiet. Then he said, Man, I had to use the bathroom sometime. Sue me. Lynch hung up the phone and looked at Wardo. We don't need a ghost. Sid, we have a carpenter. Chapter 6, The Mask of Innocence. Jeremy Motika didn't look like a killer. That was the recurring thought in Stephen Lynch's head as he reviewed the kid's file. The blue eyes, the blonde hair, the easy smile, it was the perfect camouflage. But when Lynch started digging into the background records of the Fall River Police, a different picture began to emerge. Jeremy had a history. It wasn't murder, not yet, but it was a dark prelude. An arrest for kidnapping and assault on a woman in Massachusetts. A pattern of aggression toward those he perceived as vulnerable. He's escalating, Lynch said, tapping the folder against his desk. The kidnapping was the rehearsal. Angela was the performance.